Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us in this weekday Wednesday study. We are going through the book of Judges, finishing up chapter 1 today and going into chapter 2. And of course, as we saw so many interesting things in the book of Judges, and today will be kind of a strange ending to chapter 1. So as you can see, we pick up in verse 27, and this is a very, very sad outline of what is happening. To me, it almost reads like a sentencing, like someone's a really bad criminal and they're in court and the judge says, here are all the crimes against you. You're guilty of this and this and this and this and this. And to me, this is how verses 27 through 36 really read. It lists their lack of accomplishments, it lists their shortcomings, it lists how they failed God, just one after another. And here by the tribes, verse 27, Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shean and of these other inhabitants. And, it lists these names of people we don't really can't relate to. We can't always find them on a map. Many of these cities we don't have a record of. It doesn't relate to where we are today. But the important thing here to look at is what happened when they didn't drive them out. And that is highlighted in the last part of this verse. It says that the Canaanites would dwell in that land. Let's look at that as we go through each and every one, because that is telling. It means that um, the people were there, but they were an influence. And they were an influence that the Israelites could not control. So when we get to verse 28, it says Israel was strong. They put the Canaanites to tribute, meaning they made slaves out of them. This is also totally against what God's plan was, what God's purpose was, because remember that Israel were slaves in Egypt. And one of the many times they were admonished is to not do that to anybody else, to remember what it was like to be a slave and never, ever, ever do that to anyone else. Totally against slavery and bondage and tribute like that in the Bible. I guess you could, look at it that maybe they were saying tribute as far as monetary tribute, but we see that that is not normally the case. That it is putting them to work and treating them as less than human by making them forced labor. Um, Again, verse 29, Ephraim didn't drive out the Canaanites. They dwelt there among them. And that word dwell, again, gives us the understanding that they didn't just live and occupy homes and kept their separate ways, but they were an influence. The dwelling there of the Canaanites influenced them in such a way that they worshiped and converted over to paganism. And we're going to find that spelled out a little bit more clearly in the next chapter. And so it talks about Ephraim doing that. It talks about Zebulun doing that, and the Canaanites dwelt among them. And again, not so much the people, but that they're making reference to, but the worship and the paganism and the influence of these non-godly people. So then Asher didn't do it either. The Asherites dwelt among the Canaanites. So that's a little bit different. Previous one said the Canaanites dwelt among them, but here the Asherites dwelt among the Canaanites. So it's even a deeper level of involvement and assimilation and taking on of their customs and their uh, religious system. Naphtali didn't drive out those people, but dwelt among the Canaanites, again, dwelling with them. The Amorites, again, were stronger. They forced the children of Dan into the mountain, and we talked a little bit about that in a previous lesson. And then verse 35 is interesting that it mentions the house of Joseph, where previously Joseph did not get a lot, but it was divided between his sons of Ephraim and Manasseh. So it looks like both of them, of Ephraim and Manasseh, were uh, in trouble with the Amorites. And so we get to the end of this chapter here, and it's just a very, very sad commentary. So let's move on to chapter 2. And here's where this all comes to a head. They they didn't do what God wanted them to do. They started assimilating into their culture, taking on the pagan forms of worship, forgetting the one true God that delivered them out of Egypt. And they were just going in a really, really a bad way. And, sometimes it's a little hard for us to understand because in our Western culture, we don't really have a good handle on what these pagan cultures were like. And there are study guides and books on this that if you were to look into what these pagan religions um, involve themselves with, it is just beyond horrible. It's beyond disgusting. This is not just like going to a church of a different denomination. This is involving the grossest and the most vile of methods, human sacrifice, prostitution, is how these pagan temples raised money by having women prostitutes and men prostitutes too. It's just the vilest of things. And we'll get into a little bit of that as we start to see some of this later on in the book of Judges. But just to give you a little heads up as to what's happening. And of course, here we see in chapter 2, God intervenes and says, the angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal to Bochim and said, I made you to go up out of Egypt, again, reference to leaving slavery, and brought you into the land. And then he said, I would never break my covenant with you. Something interesting I want to point out, and we're going to look at a little bit of Hebrew here just to get point, but the word for angel, obviously many today are taken with angels. There are many people who follow and are deeply involved with things pertaining to angels. I know some people collect little angel figurines, and it's a very interesting topic. The Bible does not have a separate word in Hebrew that means angel. The word for angel used here is malach. I'm just kind of circling it with my cursor here. And it is just the word that comes from a root for messenger. And so what's nice about Bible Hub here is we can do a little research. We don't have to know Hebrew, but you can click on this hyperlink here and it'll take you to the root word and where it comes from. And the word is malak, that just means messenger. You'll see that it's used over 200 times in the Hebrew Bible. It's translated as angels, 101 plus 2. It's translated as messengers, as many, if not more times, 76 and 25, not envoys. So while it can mean an angelic spiritual being taking on a human form, it can also mean someone who is just assigned a task. And so that's where it's kind of interesting here as we look at the topic of angels in the Bible. They are mysterious. They are difficult to define. The translators chose the word to be translated as angels here as they saw fit. But in the Hebrew, it really means a messenger of Yahweh, a messenger of God. And so we are kind of left to our own to know, what was this messenger like? Was it visible? Was it not visible? Was it a voice? Why did the messenger, why was it necessary? And you'll also find what's interesting here is as this messenger starts to speak, the verse or the voice doesn't go from, well, God said this, God said that. It goes to first person where the messenger is saying, I led you up out of Egypt. I made this covenant with you. I swore unto your fathers. We see that in the Hebrew. Let's see what that looks like as we look into the translation. And it does the same thing. The messenger of the Lord came and said, I made you to go up and brought you out of the land which I swear to your fathers, and said, I will never break my covenant with you. We really grasp at how this is how this happens and what happened here. Obviously, it'd be a very terrifying thing for them to see a being that they would ascribe to being an angelic being. How did it look? We struggled with pictures of, oh, they have wings and they look such and such. Um, we find throughout the Bible that these messengers take all different forms. Sometimes the people can't, who are being spoken to or interacting with these messengers, do not know if they're human. They will think that they're men, and sometimes they say that they're not men. Sometimes these messengers eat something. Other times they don't eat something. Sometimes they walk with them and touch them. Other times they're with them and then they disappear and they do miracles. And so again, these messengers are very, very unique, and we're not able to come to a conclusion, but it's something just to watch for as you read your Bible. So again, this messenger comes to them and speaks in the first person as God is speaking to them, and reiterates what he gave them for instructions. Don't make any leagues, don't make any um, agreements with them, don't show any mercy to them. And they say, and the voice says, why haven't you done this? And so the punishment is that now I'm not going to be with you. I'm not going to answer your prayers for driving them out. You've let them in. They will be thorns in your side. Their God's little g will be a snare unto you. And of course, this had an effect. Look at verse 4. It says, after this messenger of the Lord spake these words, doesn't say how he disappeared, how he left them. Obviously, they knew it was a voice from God, and it had the effect that all the people lifted up their voice and wept. The remorse was there. You got caught, and now you're going to suffer the consequences. There's no second chance. There's no, let's go ahead and change this and make it right. You got another chance to do this. The finality of this sentence struck them so much that they just wept. And doesn't say how long they wept, doesn't say that they changed anything. But verse 5 gives a little bit of an indication. They named that place Bochim, and it says there they made a sacrifice unto the Lord. Again, this is too little, too late. Um, it's very similar to, the same things that we do. God, if you take care of this problem for me, I promise you I'll go to church. I promise you I'll give more in the offering. I promise you I will do, and fill in a blank for whatever thing is, our weakness that we struggle with. We'll give up this or we'll do this. This is really what's encompassed here in verse 5. It says they didn't really change their ways. They just thought they would give a sacrifice and that would make it all better. Very distorted outlook and very distorted way of dealing with the situation. But I can't really point fingers because we tend to do the same thing. And it's I don't know what you could call it, but it's a reality of the situation. But yet it gives us awakening, saying, how do I avoid doing this in my life? How do I change what I know is too much uh, a reality of human nature? But how do I break this cycle? How do I break out of this? I fail and I recover, I fail and I recover, and we seem to do this all the time. How do we break free from that? And how do we really be what God wants us to be, and to break the habits and the sins and the things that take us away from God, and not just feel that we can make it all better with some acts of service, or giving something up. So what happens here now is that this whole mood of the chapter changes, because verses 6 through 9 totally change, and they're actually a recap or a repetition of what happened in Joshua chapter 24, verses 28. Word for word, he talks about Joshua let the people go. It makes it seem like Joshua was there when this angel came and that the people had all messed up while Joshua was there, but it really doesn't. This is somewhat put in here as a reminder to the people on what they had said they were going to do. And that during the time when Joshua was there, the people served the Lord. It says, verse 7, they served the Lord all the days of the elders that outlived Joshua. And then Joshua died and they buried him. So this little bit that's put in here is more meant to just, okay, slap their face a little bit more, if you will. First the messenger comes and talks to him, and then here are these verses where they promised that they were going to do the right thing, where they did the right thing when Joshua was there and the other elders, but now they failed again. And as we get to verse 10, it says that this generation was gathered onto their fathers, and here is the generation that's being spoken to, another generation which didn't know the Lord, nor all the works which he had done for Israel. And it says that as a result of this, the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord and served this very, very interestingly named entity called, you, sometimes we'll hear it as Balaam, uh, Baal, Baalim. And again, we're going to just this will be our last verse that we look at, but we're going to take a look at it in the Hebrew because it just sheds a little bit of light on it. And as we look at verse 11, scrolling to that right now, this word uh, is Habaalim, has telling us that it's multiple. And so when we click on it, we see that this is the first time in the Bible, interestingly enough, that this word was ever used. So this is something new that you would think that in all the time before that someone would have run into this type of worship, someone would, that this name would have shown up somewhere in the earlier writings, but it did not. So this is something new. And what you're going to find out is this word Baal has some words that are very similar to them. And as we look at, again, in the Hebrew Bible, the words are very neat. Their dictionary, the words all are related to one another. If a word is next to each other, it's relative. And so this number is 1168 in the Hebrew dictionary. We're going to take a look at 1167, and we see a word that's spelled basically the same way. It's pronounced just a little bit different with the vowels, but it means owner. And here's where we get to unpack this word and learn something super cool about it, is that what they did was they gave themselves over to a new owner, translated as Lord with a small L, but the word Lord comes from what we know in historic meaning as someone who has rule over you. So this word Baal means that they were given over to a different type of ruler, a different type of master. And so it says that they served Baalim. The I am at the end uh, in Hebrew means that it's plural. So this means that there were many different masters, many different lords that they gave themselves over, and they submitted themselves to that. They willingly put themselves under subjection of another master that was not the one true God of Israel. And so when you see the word Baal or Baalim in the Bible, think of a master, a different Lord of their lives that they are serving. So that's where we're going to leave off today. We'll pick up again next week with verse 12, but I just pray that this gives you a little bit of food for thought, as it does for me, of not letting there be any other Baals, no other masters, no other lords in our life. And because obviously the end result is not desirable. So God bless you all, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.